To start and give you some flavor where we are, cloud, everybody's talking about it. It's here, it's being adopted, of course. I'm talking from the perspective of the government and Nordic government. I know that there are governments like the British one that are far ahead, but our perspective is that we are starting in a small. Here are some cases. We had the Salem municipality in Sweden, Odense in Denmark, Narvik, Moss and Alta in Norway recently. Research and education are moving there. It's of course being done because there's money to save, as Ken was talking about. There is a study from Copenhagen Economics that told us we can save 825 million euro for Norway only, and there are big savings if you look broader. But still, well, this is a bit old, 2011, but the cloud adoption in public services is not that big yet. And we shall not confuse offerings with adoption, because adoption is actually cloud being used by somebody. So that's important to have in mind. This is just stolen from Harvard Business Review. It's just underbuilds your thesis. It's happening, it's coming, and it will be here, and it will be the main way of provisioning ICT services in the future, and the very near future at that. And there are also reasons for that are derived from surveys Harvard Business Review has done for that purpose. But there are also challenges, of course. Hooray, we have cloud offerings, we have a lot of money to save, and we have a lot of other benefits. But there are also challenges that slow the pace of adopting cloud. This is the Open Group survey extract. I took just the biggest challenges, and the biggest one is security. As it says, there are fewer minor things that have under 8%. But I thought it was important to highlight that security integration issues, and that also plays into another type of situation, that is what kind of cloud are you using. I will be coming to that quite quickly. Governance or service management or whatever, and vendor lock-in. Well, and my take is, of course, also on standards. As ECIS said, we are talking about interoperability and open standards. And, of course, open standards are important. They are not a goal in itself. We have on our digital agenda open standards as a means, and public procurement to, as being small markets, to have access to a large supply of services, cloud services being important ones. What are the actual incentives for governments to move to cloud? And I'm talking now from the point of view of my government, and also, I may say, other Nordic governments at least. I cannot presume to talk on the part of all governments, but this is an example. We have this increasing cost of purchasing, running, and maintaining ICT solutions. Of course, cost savings, especially on tighter budgets. We are not there yet in Norway, but we have a quite stringent fiscal policy. So it's not that because we are a country with no economic downturn, we have still tight budgets in the public sector. Then new user demands, bring your own device, digital government. You have to deliver digital services. They're changing demographics. You get people who are gotten internet and smartphones with their milk, and they will not accept just anything from the governments, so you be prepared. And of course, it's access to and supply of critical ICT competences. And in my country, for example, there are small locations in municipalities where getting this kind of competences is very hard. And also the competences we may free by outsourcing may find alternate use. So what do we actually expect from a cloud? Well, we have some functional requirements to provision our ICT. We will have to look at life cycle costs, and especially exit costs. This will be a critical issue, because life cycle is life cycle, and we will be having some agreements with a provider of cloud, but if the exit cost is very high, the actual supplier exchangeability will be very low, because we will not have incentive to move because of the cost. Service management, security, including personal data protection, that has been very much focused, so I won't go into that in detail. Data and application portability, as Ken has mentioned, and contractual issues of control and liability. But to try to make some clearness in the fog, I'm concerned that we are talking about cloud like one big cloud, but it's not. There are at least 3 types of that. You may be aware of that. I won't go into explaining. We will have specialists to do that. But there are also 3 models of provisioning cloud. And so you have a table here with at least 9 possibilities. So you can have public cloud, you can have community cloud, you can have private cloud on all those 3 levels. And depending on which scenario for provisioning you take, you will have different requirements and you will need different standards, not maybe different standards, but maybe a different selection of standards. So the thing really to do first is to think which of those scenarios are you going to follow before you go further. And we know that there are public clouds there, and the cases I've been showing you are actually procuring public cloud services, which are standard office services like mail, filing, and so on. That you can do direct procurement on public cloud. Unfortunately, most of the market now it's supplied by big American suppliers, but that's what is. Hopefully, there will be more other kind of suppliers. Public cloud can be also provisioned by establishing a marketplace. So these are other dimensions even. How do you actually procure? You can do it directly, go to the supplier and go into an agreement, but you can also create a marketplace. And the British G-Cloud is a very good example of that. They have done tremendous work to systematize and offer cloud services to their governments in a very, very easy to use way. Then you can think into terms of community cloud. Well, we don't trust those public cloud guys anyway. Let's do a community cloud with somebody we know and have a relation to. And also it could be managed by the government itself. So here is another option, maybe other issues that can arise for standards and for contracts. And then, of course, there is private cloud, that is government just or an agency makes their own cloud. They may use, for example, data centers outside with the collocation of servers, but they control the whole thing themselves. The old term is outsourcing or something like that. And then, depending on which kind of scenario you choose, which kind of provisioning you will select, what kind of procurement you will do, you have to look what standards actually are important to me in that context. Obviously, information security with certification or government accreditation depending on scenario. Procuring public cloud over a market will require that. Setting up a community cloud, not necessarily, maybe. You will need maybe security audits, but not necessarily certification. Audit is already done. Data portability, it was mentioned. Application platform portability, if you are doing cloud at that level. So, and there are no standards at the moment. I've just looked at Oasis. They are working on some standard, published something in August last year. So it's very, very fresh. But we need that. But also pricing models, and especially also models for exit costs. How do we calculate exit costs? How can we compare all those offers? Something must be standardized. Otherwise, we are comparing apples and pears. Federated identities is of interest, especially when we interconnect clouds. And, of course, monitoring, auditing, billing, and governance policies. Service quality standards, well, depending again on the level, these standards examples I just list here are for data centers, so it's at the infrastructure level. But there might be service quality standards on other levels like platform or application software level. And of course, service level agreements. Standards, they must be mature, they must be workable, global, and publicly available. So that's the requirement list. I'm just finishing, don't worry. There are some contractual issues, of course. We need to do a risk analysis when we have chosen a scenario for how do we provision cloud. We need to determine what is the residual risk that me as a public agency will be sitting with after I put my things into the cloud. And there are a lot of methodologies there, and there are some standards for that. I imagine I'm not very well versed in all that, but we need something that will fit cloud computing. There is data controller, data processor contract, which is derived from the legislation, at least as we have it in the Nordic countries. Data protection legislation requires, if you move your personal data processing somewhere else, you have to have this kind of contract. And it spells out how the personal data are to be handled, so it needs to be a part of an overall contract. Reciprocality, that is, you have a better balance between you and the big provider, I mean Google, and a just very tiny municipality north of Norway, not quite the same league. Something needs to be done with the contracts to allow for a little bit more balance. Exit cost, I've already talked about. Working on some common clauses between suppliers and governments could be a way to go if we can manage to collect enough suppliers and governments to talk about it. And of course, compliance with regulations and personal data protection is of course falls to mind, but not only. You have national security, you have export controls, you have bookkeeping regulations. In my country, you cannot move your copies of what you call it, invoice things out of the Nordic countries. It's not allowed because our taxation authorities need to audit that, and they need to access the data on a geographically limited area. We have in the Nordic countries a bit of commonalities, regulatory approach, government setup is more or less alike, so we try to work together on cloud approaches. And I cannot claim that we have done very big discoveries. What we have discovered, it's very early days for government. So to my mind, and I'm speaking now as an expert, not representative of any Nordic government, but it's too early to regulate. Otherwise, that we have already regulation in place, of course, that I've been mentioning, but the special regulation for cloud. It's important to promote best practices, to share experience, to derive lessons from what we have done. We can try to negotiate common approach to legal and security issues. We try to do it at the Nordic level. It may be done at the European level, and I think Ken and his people are working on that. Work on common or standard specifications for procurement. We will be doing that at national level anyway, and we will try to align with our Nordic colleagues. Provide guidance to public sector procurers, but also to the potential suppliers, because when we are talking about platform and infrastructure, there is a number of suppliers, as Ken was pointing out. So there is a market there, but it needs to be educated. And of course, build on open standards, and also, in the end, pool purchasing power. We are small countries, we have small governments, and to really get good conditions for a contract, we may be doing this kind of exercises, but it's not very near future. It's more difficult exercise doing that, even though in the partnership we are trying to talk about it, but I think we have to discuss how it may be done.